Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and welcome to the Friday Conversation, episode 82. We are here with author Adrian Tchaivkovsky. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer. I started off with fantasy. I wrote one sci-fi book that turned out to be inexplicably popular, and then kind of became a dedicated sci-fi writer for quite a while, and I've recently started getting back into fantasy as well. I write mostly in both fields about spiders, which is certainly what I'm best known for.
Yes, yeah. But a few comments when we announced on our forum that we had you as a guest. One of the first comments was, "Oh, jumping spiders! I'm so excited." So, yeah. And with us joining us today is Robyn. Can you give us a quick intro, Robyn?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, Robyn from Bookendsandbiscuits, which is a very small YouTube channel that mainly focuses on sci-fi and occasionally fantasy and a little bit of crime. So, yeah. Read a lot of Adrian, so I'm quite excited.
Nice. And Chris.
Yes, my name's Chris Mohan. I'm sometimes YouTuber, mostly appear on other people's channels having fun chats with like-minded people.
Nice. Very cool. So, Adrian, I've read that you had studied psychology and zoology in university. How did you end up, well, you actually ended up in law as an executive. How did you end up writing your first novel? How did that come to pass?
I was trying to be a novelist before I went to university. So the wanting to be a writer very much came first. The choice of university course came from things I was generally interested in, and you can see in my work there is a lot of zoology of various types in my work. There is a lot of interest in the human mind and so forth. Both interests honestly were not being particularly satisfied by the content of the university course, sadly. There was literally one zoology lecture touching on insects, and it was mostly about how we kill them. So you can appreciate that wasn't terribly to my taste. It's one of those things that the through line has always been from about age 17 I wanted to be a writer, and I was submitting manuscripts from about 18 and getting nowhere for really quite a long time, but everything else was just sort of stuff that happened along the way, and especially getting into law as a profession was this weird series of odd coincidences and opportunities that just happened to be there. It wasn't anything. I never decided, I'll be a lawyer. It was just like, I need to pay the rent, and this is a potential route to that's just opened up.
That's so similar to my experience, even of people that I grew up with, Adrian, where you kind of go to university based around what your sort of general interests are, but not really a fully formed plan, come out the other side and at some stage morph into something else. Like nearly everybody I went to university with or did A-levels with has ended up in a different field. And I don't think that happens quite as regularly in States, for instance, or otherwise. It just seems to be a very British thing that seems like everybody does in some aspects.
I think my wife may be the only person I know who's actually working even tangentially in the field she went to university for, and that was music, which obviously has a bit more of an immediate practical application.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It does happen a little bit, but yeah, I think we often find ourselves in doing weird things as our profession that we didn't expect. So, yeah. So you mentioned, Adrian, that you had started writing when you were younger, and you always wanted to write. What made you try again as you were older and wanted to get back into it? What sparked that?
Well, I never stopped. So I have basically, from about age 17, 18 to just before I was 35, I was really submitting kind of constantly, a book every couple of years. And getting absolutely nowhere with it, and also having gone back to look at the kind of the drawer of unpublished manuscripts for very good reason, because many of them are very, very bad. But what I was doing, of course, was I was just sort of incrementally getting better at writing the more I did it. And because I was not at that point someone who was terribly good at taking any kind of criticism, was probably the only way it was going to happen.
Wow. That'd be the hardest part, I think, for me anyway, that the criticism or the feedback, and not try not to take it personally, or trying to let it be, kind of a set you back or make you feel like you're not capable of doing it.
I think being able to take constructive, well-meant criticism in a constructive way is an enormous gift. And it's something you literally have to develop it as a writer. It's part of your skill set, because that's what editors and agents and so forth are for. But certainly when I was kind of coming up through the ranks and sending off those manuscripts, if I'd been a member of a writer's group and someone else had tried to kind of steer me in the right direction, I think I would have just kicked against it, because I was very, very convinced that everything I was putting out was gold dust, which it was not.
So once you did get your first kind of break, I guess, in the fantasy, your first big series, but I know you said you look back now on some of those unpublished ones, but have you reused any of those stories? Did you go back and go, okay, the idea was good, but execution not so much?
I've actually been able to salvage the 2 books I wrote before Empire in Black and Gold are now out in print. And they required a fair amount of rewriting, but they were worth salvaging. In the case of the book immediately before that and everything before that, it was just like, it would have been so much work. And I am, who knows, maybe at some point I'll run out of ideas and I'll go back and redo it from the start and just kind of hoover up all those ideas, because frankly the ideas I think were still pretty good. But it's just my, the killer is the writing style. And you go back a little and that style is all over the place, and I'm kind of zooming around from head to head inside a paragraph, which I should stress is a thing that you can absolutely do, but you've got to know how to do it. And I didn't then, and honestly I'm not terribly good at it now. And so the amount of, I currently have a head full of perfectly serviceable new ideas, which have far more of a claim on my attention. But it's entirely possible I'll go back and just pirate the basic idea of what was going on and write a new book around it if I completely run out of thoughts when we come to tender a new set of books.
How often do ideas come into your head for new books? Are you constantly thinking of new ideas, and when do you know whether to pursue it or to just leave it in the background and for later?
Well, I mean, these days, because I'm getting older, I write everything down. So I'm constantly just, I've got a file of notes that I just keep, where it's literally a paragraph of, what about a world where this happens? And that will go, that will just sit there, and then at some point I will think, right, I need to start putting together some new proposals to send off to my agent or to publishers or whatever, and then we'll go back through there and look at what are the most appealing ones. And often the ideas that I'll eventually decide to actually follow up are ones where I've kind of thought of other bits to add on to them as time has gone on. And so that's obviously, it shows that it's hooked me some part of my imagination. So I've got ideas in that file that have been sitting there for years and will probably never get used. And other ideas, sometimes you have 2 ideas that arise separately and you think, actually, if I put those 2 things together, that's a complete book. Which is, I mean, for example, that's so Children of Ruin, the second book in that series, has 2 completely separate book ideas in it that just happen to marry up really well.
That's a really cool idea, because I think from the outside looking in on your work, Adrian, it seems like, and this goes with the fact that you write both sci-fi and fantasy, you're a veritable treasure trove of ideas, and I've always thought it must be great fun to be your literary agent, to kind of say, right, when you go, I've got an idea for a book, you don't really necessarily know where it's going to come from, if you know what I mean, or what form it's going to take, and that would always make your project sort of exciting even for other people.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's one of those, I get to the point now where I can generally tell, that's a novella idea, that's a novel idea, that's possibly an idea for that particular publisher, because unusually I work with about 4 different publishers at the moment, and they all have they all get sort of a slightly different type of stuff.
And you mentioned your time writing before. You know, when you were younger. I wondered during your time in studying, or actually your profession in law, because I know you have to be very particular, but every word matters a lot. You have to be very careful with every single word and how to interpret it for the law. Did that change your writing style or your approach to writing, being so careful about which words are used where?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the things I found is I think writing factual stuff, and I think legal writing still counts as factual, even though that sometimes there tends to be a certain interesting relationship with the truth in the way you're presenting a case. But it's you are constrained, and it doesn't engage the same part of my brain as writing fiction. Basically, in fact, there are a surprising number of things I can do alongside writing a book. So editing doesn't, and for that matter, I've written some material for kind of role-playing games, and that doesn't either, because it isn't that full kind of immersion in creativity. But certainly, I mean, writing legal stuff is, you've got to pick every word carefully, and because of that, it means you don't have the freedom, and so it doesn't help a great deal. I think the main thing I probably got out of that particular part of my life is a remarkable number of lawyer characters turning up in my work.
That's the next version of D&D, the lawyer.
You know, that must exist. There must be kind of like lawyers and litigation or something.
And speaking of other hobbies you have, I also read that you are into live action role playing, and I wondered, have you ever been injured during these events?
No, I mean, honestly, it's not something. I mean, probably if I was still in it, doing that actively, then the answer would be yes, because I'm not as young as I used to be. But I've not done that for over 10 years now. I was never seriously injured. You know, other than the odd sprained ankle and so forth. You certainly hear the stories about the guy being carried off, begging them not to cut his chainmail off him because it cost £200 or whatever. But
yeah, to that end, because like we just touched on a lot of the ideas. You must have a lot of hobbies that sit outside of writing as well to kind of infuse into that kind of idea. So whether it's live action role playing in the past, you kind of alluded to the fact that you for role playing games and that kind of stuff. So do you think all that kind of being in the creative zone in multiple directions sort of helps you?
I mean, a lot of the time it's also like a release valve. So a lot of the things I do, so when I sketch or when I paint miniatures and things like that, because I'm still very driven on a kind of a creative level, having a hobby that gives me something at the end of it that I can look at and say, oh, I've done a thing, is psychologically very useful. I mean, other than that, I don't live roleplay, but I do a lot of tabletop gaming, which is probably my main sort of hobby. I think it's a good... There's certainly a dialogue between the creativity in gaming and the creativity in writing. And in fact, I went into writing for a variety of reasons because I was into tabletop gaming as a teenager, and without that, it wouldn't have happened at all. I think there is definitely a part, talking about like which parts of the brain get engaged, there's definitely when you're running a game, the position of the games master and the position of the author have quite a lot of overlap with the because you're inhabiting multiple characters in quick succession, because you are sort of creating and running the logic of that world. It certainly it informs a great deal of my particular sort of writing method.
So, with that, I know, for example, the Expanse book's one of the ones that's obvious, where actually the beginning book, I think the first one, was based on a game that they've been playing. So is there ever think you'd ever write a book based on maybe one of the tabletop games you played, and the characters within that, or the shenanigans even of that? Or is that not something you would do?
I mean, my first series, the Shadows of the Apt, is based on a role-playing world that a game that I ran, but the events of the book are not the events of the game. I think I almost feel that because the specific events of the game are created in conjunction with the players, they're not necessarily mine to run off with, but the world was something I'd created, and therefore that was a thing I could reuse. And it was, at the time I was looking for something I could give a really good go to, because I'd been going for quite a while without any kind of success in getting published. And so having that world that I knew extremely well, because this is one of the other things you get from being a games master, is you know your worlds better than you necessarily need to, because the players won't stay on message a lot of the time, which becomes enormously useful for a writer, because you just have that that breadth of the world extending beyond the bounds of the page and beyond the bounds of the story you're writing, which makes it feel a lot more real. And I know there are certainly schools of thought on writing that are very dismissive about world building and the idea of getting immersed in a fantasy world, but I think it's an enormously important part of the trade. I think it's one reason why these books are as popular as they are. It's like people like the places. People like the places to feel real, to feel like an actual alternate reality, not just a stage that you can play a story out on.
And I think a lot to be said there about having that breadth, because you feel you can get lost in it. You don't, exactly that. You don't feel like it's just this part of it. You feel like you're just seeing part of a whole massive world. It makes a big difference in the book, I think, definitely. So yeah, it's cool. Thank you.
I mean, it's also very convenient when you're looking for sequel material, of course.
What is your approach to, first of all, building a world on the back end, but also introducing a reader to a world? What is your approach to kind of letting them roam in it and letting them learn what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a huge part of the art, really, because one of the things that fantasy is quite deservedly notorious for is just this enormous avalanche of names and apostrophes and places, and just completely front loading all of that world, so that, I mean, and you sometimes even see it on the back cover blurb, and I always find if you've got, like, if you have at least more than 2 complete nonsensical words in your back cover blurb, you've kind of lost the fight for someone to pick up that book. And you can have people love fantastical worlds, but you also need to have some sort of solid handle on it that you can immediately understand without needing to know who the Grockly dog are or whatever the hell is going on in the book. So, I mean, my approach for building the worlds is very much, one of the things I don't tend to do is the secret magic world. Which is something that's quite common, especially in sort of pseudo-historical setups, where you've got something that is basically kind of the Middle Ages, or at least as close to the Middle Ages as an MGM movie a King Arthur movie ever got. And there is magic, but there is the secret magic, and it's the secret, and presumably the main character is part of the secret magic, but it's this weird magic which, whilst being world-threatening and dangerous and so forth, doesn't actually in any way affect the history of the world. And that kind of I can't quite make that work logically for me. And so I'm much more interested in, well, look, all right, let's take some people who are just people like we're people, except they can do this. So, what about not just if they're a secret clan of werewolves, or like everyone's a werewolf. So what does that do? What changes when that has changed? And just following those kind of expanding ripples of logic out from that initial point. So Shadows the Aptitude, what if everyone has these insect powers? So they're people, but some of them can fly, and some of them have kind of like spines out of their arms, and all that sort of thing. And then the expanding logic of that produces this whole complex world of Kindon, and their interrelationships. And then with Echoes of the Fall, this what if everyone is a shape changer? And how does that affect their beliefs about the world and their relationship with actual animals and things like that? And that, to me, is always a much more interesting and fertile ground for creating a fantasy world than just keeping everything kind of in a bottle. So, I mean, as to how you introduce that, this is difficult. And I've got to say, I mean, I feel the Shadows of the Apts is quite front-loaded because there are some very, very important concepts that you kind of have to get right from the beginning. And I suspect that if I was writing that now, I would hopefully find a slightly more elegant way of doing it, because it is pretty much in the first 4 chapters you get introduced to like these 3 major concepts of the world. And I still get asked by people, you know, are the people in the Shadows of the Apt, are they insects or are they people? And so and whilst they're described very clearly as people in the first paragraph, there's some in the first chapter, there's obviously something to do with the way the world is introduced that isn't quite fixing that information. So more recently I'm writing, I've got a fantasy series on the go at the moment, which has it started with City of Last Chances and is hopefully going to go on for a few books more. And that was was the first time I really had to take what was quite a complicated world with quite a lot of stuff going on and work out how am I going to introduce all this stuff. And the best way of doing it often is, honestly, was you introduce it by kind of parceling it, slowly spreading out worldview, introducing it bit by bit, and just keeping tabs on what it is that the reader actually needs to understand to make sense of what's going on. And a lot of the time you can play games with this so that you mention a thing and it sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing, and then 5 chapters later on you actually find out, oh no, that is really quite fantastical. But you don't need to know that it's fantastical when it's first mentioned. And so, you know, if someone's talking about factories, then everyone, you know what a factory is. You have this, you have your kind of 19th century kind of mill sort of picture in your head. Later on, you find those factories are full of demons, but at that point, you're finding it out in a chapter which can give the concept room to breathe without having to cram it in with everything else. I think that's the art, is really holding on to things as long as you possibly can, just so everything has its own space to impact the reader.
It's one of my favourite things about science fiction fantasy as a general genre compared to the other ones, is that a lot of it starts with the premise of what if, and it's almost like a flowchart, even for the reader as much as the writer, I'm sure, to say, well, if this is true at the start, then this is possible, and you kind of work your way through, and then you can introduce kind of things from the outside devices, etc., that will change your thoughts on that. But in general, they're very much thought experiments, and then, as you say, creating a playground within that, which is... I don't think other genres do that to the same extent, and you know, while a lot of people think fantasy readers or sci-fi readers like existing in other worlds, I think there's an awful lot of it into the what if aspect rather than just kind of being outside.
Well, I mean, there's a certain level of inhabiting another world with some of the genres. Like, so for example, if you've got the Bond style spy stuff, there's obviously a thing, you know, people potentially want to be Bond and want to have that terribly glamorous life, which I think doesn't actually exist that much in the books, because he's not terribly glamorous in the books and generally has a pretty horrible time of it, and when he's not having a horrible time of it, it's pretty horrible to everyone else. But there is that kind of, but you know, with espionage books or with romance books or so forth, there's often that idea of, look, this is you're getting a taste of how the other half live, whichever other half it is. But none of these genres can do it to the extent that sci-fi and fantasy, that speculative fiction as a whole, can do it, because we just have that extra freedom. We're not penned in by the real, I guess.
Yeah. It always made me a little bit sad as a reader to know that authors spend so much time building a world, and we often don't see this big iceberg. We usually just see what's above water. We don't see what's below. It's a little, for worlds that we really love, it's a little sad for us because we want to know everything about it. So what is that like to not,
you should go and complain to my editors, because before my editors get hold of it, there's an awful lot more world in there. I mean, honestly, whilst I am very much a world-focused writer, it's very true that you do kind of have to try and make things serve the plot. And I mean, I will confess I don't always make that happen, and sometimes I will successfully win out and get something in a book which probably shouldn't have been there, purely because it's a bit of world that I'm just really, really proud of. But in general, yeah, I mean, I mean, these days I cut a lot of stuff myself before I submit it, and then the editor cuts some more, because I am just... I tend to be extremely over proud of various things that I have invented that don't necessarily go anywhere in the book. And sometimes I will keep them there, and then I will make them important in a later book, and that in that way kind of justify my previous enthusiasm. But you know, there's you always end up shaving off a few bits that you wish you could have kept.
I think we got an insight into that when Jenny Wirtz, when we were talking to her, when she was giving us the previous 3,000 years before the story started, kind of talk for 15 minutes, and it was like, whoa, when she says I'll give you another couple of hundred years in the next time we talk, except and kind of dealing that out. She basically says her notebooks are like this gold dust of everything that's happened in that world before it, and you kind of go, okay, this wasn't just kind of thrown together, or, you know, it's so well kind of crafted.
I mean, I mean, sometimes also some of this stuff actually turns out to be important when you didn't think it was going to. So in the book I've just finished, there is, as part of the backstory, the place it's set in was once part of this big necromantic empire, but hasn't been for like 1,000 years, and it only kind of there's this sort of there are various bits and bobs left over from it, like words in the language and. Like a sort of a leftover priesthood, which is now kind of just the civil service and that kind of thing. And it's all mostly there just to give this place a sense that this is a real place with its own history that isn't... Because I do find when you have a book where everything only serves the plot, it can feel very contrived when everything's kind of just neatly wrapped up at the end and there's literally nothing magical left in the world that hasn't been part of the plot. So, and then of course, you know, I get 2/3 of the way through the book and it turns out, oh, actually, maybe this necromantic empire from X thousand years ago is important to what's going on. And then, you know, it's like leaving tools around just in case you need them.
It's a bit like Planet of the Apes, isn't it? You know, where they get through to the end of the story and then they reveal the statue in the sand at the end of it. It doesn't really serve any purpose to that individual film in some way other than to kind of give it some sort of like more wonder and context, if you know what I mean, but it's something else to be built off going forward. I don't know, actually. I mean, I kind of feel with that one it's almost actually that is because obviously it makes the entire film funnels into that point, yeah, as to obviously what is going on, and it actually does kind of mean there's in the original film there's almost nothing left. That's right.
Although there was I can't remember where now, but there was this series of cartoons about the idea that at this point he's accepted a world with recognisable horses and the English language as being entirely possible under some sort of galactic coincidence. So why not the Statue of Liberty? That's way less. Way less of a startling coincidence than all of the apes speaking perfect English.
Yeah. Another what-if thought experiment.
Yeah. So you're saying you have a lot of ideas that and good ideas that you enjoy in your books that you like to cut out, but is there like a world or a specific thing that you've written that is your favourite, that's kind of like your baby, or do you love all your children equally?
I mean, I think I'm always fondest of the worlds where there is that great expanse of stuff that hasn't been touched on. So, I mean, Shadows of the Apt, that world has a load of other stuff I could do. You know, if there was a demand, then I'd go back to that like a shot and just write some more. There's certainly more stuff in the Architects series. You know, it's a trilogy. It's probably only going to be those 3 books, but the universe has a lot more in it that I couldn't fit in. There's the whole one of the major alien races gets mentioned quite a few times, but you never get to learn much about them. And there is a load of stuff about them in the initial kind of world building sort of notes I was making that I just couldn't find an excuse to crowbar in. But I mean, I think honestly, at the moment, the City of Last Chances world is the one I'm currently working in, and that is just expanding in all directions, really quite wildly.
Nice. Because that's really perfect for when Netflix inevitably do The Architects as a TV series, and you already have the next kind of lot, sort of as a general idea.
I mean, that would it would be lovely, but I mean, it's. Who knows what is going on with anything like that at the moment, given
indeed.
the current situation.
Yeah, it's wild. And we promised not to tell, but have there ever been a time when an editor came to you and said, "You need to I suggest you remove this piece of world building out," and you thought, "I'll take care of that later. It has meaning later in the series," and you'd like, "Oh, I need to figure out what to do with this now, like to keep it in."
Yes, I've absolutely done that. I mean, these. Oh, unashamedly, and I always feel when I have kind of laced it in, then actually that the book has generally been better for it than if it had just been cut, because it's adding an extra dimension to things. I mean, these days I can generally see it coming as well, so hopefully I can get my justification in first and put in some reason why this is absolutely necessary to the plot, when it's really just a thing I just found really, really fun. And there's an element of serendipity in that, and frequently it does then become something that is very useful to build on later, or just because of the way I've laced it in, becomes a really integral part of the plot.
I guess that also reflects if it's something that you're really enthusiastic about. Obviously, it's in your head and sitting there for a reason, so kind of building off it's very easier than that you're not so interested in that as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the things that comes through in any writer's writing is when they are really keen on something, and when they are having a lot of fun with something. I think that just tends to lend itself to more enjoyable reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like the reader and the author feed off each other in a way that we kind of pick up with an enthusiasm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's an enthusiasm that is being shared over the head of the main character in the book, who is the kind of the connecting node. I mean, one of the best examples of this, I think, is probably the Southern Reach books by Vandermeer, where the main characters in those books have really, really bad times of it, but you can absolutely tell that Jeff Vandermeer is having an enormous amount of fun creating this extremely grotesque world, and it is enormous fun to read. You just kind of, the medium between reader and writer is just this character having a very, very bad day.
And when we started off, you mentioned Children of Time being very popular. When you were writing the book, did you think, "Wow, I really think I'm onto something," or did it come more as a surprise, like, "Oh wow, like I'm"?
No, I mean, when I wrote that book, I thought this is the little jolly for me because I want to do this thought experiment about Planet of the Spiders, and they will, if I'm lucky, they will grudgingly put it into print, and then we will be on with the fantasy at that point. And that is also what, as far as I can work out, the publishers thought, because certainly, there wasn't much of an advance or anything with it. It was very, very much, all right, your fantasy books are doing well enough, we will keep you happy by putting out this weird spider book, but then back to the dragons, please.
So what was that conversation like when the book took off and did really well? What was that conversation like when they asked you to, for the follow-up?
Well, they didn't ask me. Weirdly, I guess to their credit, they didn't. They weren't on at me to do another one. I got to a few years down the line, the ideas started to filter in. I thought, I could do a sequel to that, and it's done really well, and the sequel ideas sound fun. And so I went to them, and they were certainly very happy to hear it, but they hadn't been kind of agitating for it.
Comes as a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I am a little surprised, but I guess the thing was there was never. I think if we got to a point where I hadn't pitched another book to them, that might have been the window for them to say, "Have you thought about doing?" But as it was, there was always something else. We were doing. I'm trying to think of the order of things, but my mind's completely blank as to precisely what was coming out from Pam Macmillan between the fantasy books and Children of Ruin. It feels like they should be at least. Oh, there was Doors of Eden. I can't remember which order they came out in now.
It speaks to your very successful career, anyway.
Well, you know what? Yeah, that's a nice thing to be able to say, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, it's. But certainly, there was never a point where it was just sort of this sort of radio silence from my end. There was always something I was under contract with. So I think they didn't. They felt they probably didn't need to rock the boat by making suggestions. But yeah, certainly they were very happy to get the sequel when it came out, and it's done pretty well. And the third one seems to be doing all right. And at the moment, I'm probably just about to pitch the fourth. So,
nice.
Look at Robyn's face.
Oh, that's exciting. Slightly excited.
Yeah. How do those pitch meetings go, Adrian? What goes into that? Do you prepare for them, or how do you pitch a book that especially for like an ongoing series that you want to add on to? What are those meetings like?
Well, it's mostly me with my agent, and then the agent will go and take it to the editor. I mean, it varies. I generally try and get by on as little as possible, so I've just got as much room to manoeuvre. I mean, well, there's been at least one situation where I've had the original book I was supposed to be writing under contract completely crashed and burned. So, you know, and you can always kind of go back and have another conversation if that happens. But the more sort of, you know, if I can basically, my ideal world is if I can just get a contract on the basis of a science fiction book and then no more details whatsoever. But in this case, so I suspect I can probably go in and say, it'll be Children of Time book 4. It'll be called Children of Strife in this case. Because that's, that unusually the idea has come with quite a good, decent feeling title. And they'll probably not want much more than that. With something where it's a complete standalone. I mean, later on down the line, certainly, they will want something because they need to give it to the publicity people and so forth. They can look at how to market and that kind of thing. But ideally, I like having as much freedom as possible. And currently, I'm in frankly, the privileged position where I can generally get by with saying, "Oh, right, it was a science fiction book," and they'll say, "Okay." And obviously, if it's a matter of it's another book in this series. So I'm doing more in the City of Last Chances series. I'm potentially, I think, doing another Dogs of War book, that kind of thing. At that point, it very much comes. The publishers aren't really going to start splitting hairs about precisely where it's going, because that's as much as they really need to know at that point.
So, I don't know, because I have no idea of the concept of this, but how long does it take you to write the book then? If you've just come with literally, I'm just going to write a sci-fi book, and you've got a vague idea, how long does that process take you, estimately,
So first draft, I usually like to leave 9 months, although that has been crunched a bit recently because I've somewhat overcommitted. I can generally do 6 months. And because of my writing process, which is quite sort of world heavy at the beginning, it means that everything lines up neatly and there isn't that much that needs to be edited between first draft and submission draft if I've got it right. So I've got a very, I think basically I've got a very efficient process. Some books, I'm finding the fantasy books actually much quicker to write, just because there's a certain level of freedom of creation in them, especially in the City of Last Chances books, which I'm writing with a lot less plot prep. I'm just letting the books kind of carry themselves and the characters carry themselves, and that seems to be working reasonably well. And those are quicker just because I will put more hours into writing them. But yes, I mean 6 months, I guess, these days since I went full time.
That's insane. That's so quick. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but it seems quick.
The benchmark is that Michael Moorcock used to write books in about 3 days. So, And I know, I know I am on the quick side, but I know several writers who are currently writing who are decidedly quicker than I am.
Do you find that the quicker you write a book, that there's more editing has to go into it, or do you have that process streamlined?
Not so much. I think the degree of editing is pretty much constant no matter what. I do find with normally I'm a planner, and that helps a great deal. I know exactly where the book is going, usually, except for the very final twist, which I will leave hanging, and then hopefully the book will have the momentum to take that to where it needs to go. And if I've got that right, then it doesn't need much editing at all. With the ones I'm writing where it's far more kind of just letting it go where it goes, there is usually a point about 2/3 of the way through where I realise I need to kind of go back and redo the last 5 chapters because it's not going where I think it needs to go. So I've got an idea of like, this is obviously going to be like the final sort of dramatic sort of build up and crash and so forth, but where I currently am isn't going to go there, and so I need to go back and sort of just tinker with it with a spanner, really.
I find it, any author that doesn't plot, I find absolutely wild. The fact that you can just building block the like wall bit by bit and it ends up somewhere just blows my mind. It really does.
I was exactly the same. I am traditionally a planner, and I still am for most things. It's just with this particular fantasy world, I have put in enough work on the world that no matter where the characters... It's very much like a role-playing game. No matter where the characters go, I know what is there and what they're going to run into, and so I can keep pace with them because the logic of the world kind of precedes them wherever they go.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, I think it's a Pirate TV one, where they were talking about Neil Cross, who writes Luther, and where he would say he would know what the planning was that was going on, but the actual character words that came out would often surprise him. When he got to that page, the character would say this, and he'd go, I can't believe you just said that, but it makes total sense, you know. And a lot of the machinations of his writing of those scenes kind of played out in real time, almost, rather than kind of being very planned before.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always need a certain connection to the spontaneity of your subconscious, I think. I mean, even, and certainly even with the stuff I've most planned, there is always that element of the precise fine details to flesh out that skeleton you built are going to come in the moment of writing.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And I know that in Echoes of the Fall, you wanted to kind of explore spirituality. What kind of research went into that when you wrote that book, if any? And also, did it challenge any of your personal beliefs, or did it make you question anything as you were writing that?
I mean, my personal beliefs are very much... I'm a kind of a rationalist, sort of a scientific rationalist, and I... Possibly that in itself leaves me free to explore different models of religion and spirituality, because I don't actually have much of a kind of a religious anchor in my own life. And I mean, it's... So with Echoes of the Fall, a lot of the research of Echoes of the Fall was into sort of I think the best way to describe it is like pre-European contact civilizations, both in the Americas and elsewhere. And I did a lot, and that very difficult tightrope where you don't want to basically just end up wholesale stealing people's belief structures, because that is highly problematic. But at the same time, you don't want to be locked in this little European box of this is how religion and your relationship to the wider world works. And so I basically just read as widely as I could on sort of culture and societal structure and beliefs, and even just things like architecture and stuff like that. So I just ended up with an enormous bag of building blocks of these are things that have worked. And then it's a matter of kind of trying to construct a world that isn't directly kind of just recreating in some sort of fantasy version of a real world culture, but is giving you something that is completely novel, but it's still informed by more than just the European Middle Ages, which are so kind of frequently trotted out in fantasy worlds.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we have to bring this up because it's such a big topic, not only in writing but just in everyday life, which is artificial intelligence. And I wanted to get your thoughts on is it something that concerns you? Is it something that you don't think it's a big issue yet, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it is a big issue. I think it's a big problem. I think one of the biggest problems is we call it artificial intelligence because there's nothing in the world currently existing that I'm aware of that actually is. There are language learning models. That's not AI, and treating them like they are AI is one of the reasons that you get all of these hilarious stories about academics being asked for papers they haven't written, or legal pleadings drafted by AI. I think it's because people have been told that these things are AIs, which comes with the implication that they understand. And they don't understand at all. They have no concept of the context of the text that they produce, other than that it is similar to other examples of that text. So, the idea of, for example, having an AI-driven search engine is anathema, is ridiculous, because it can't ever know whether it's right. It can just know if it finds some other source that it decides is a reliable source on whatever criteria. And obviously, humans have difficulty enough determining that, let alone an expert system. Then it's going to tell you that's the right answer, and it isn't necessarily true. I mean, it's already kind of contributing to the general unusability of the search engines that have kind of held the internet together for the last 10 years, which is kind of terrifying. But, I mean, on the writing side, it means you can get a thing to churn out increasingly large volumes of text in a particular style, and potentially with particular elements that you specify, but it's not going to be good. It's going to be derivative, and as now these learning models are are being trained on more and more AI generated text, because AIs can generate text orders of magnitude more quickly than humans, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. The danger is that there is definitely a commercial mindset that would rather have cheap than good. And, you've got that slider that's, good and expensive and cheap and rubbish, and they will inch it to the left, to the cheap and rubbish side as much as possible, because they want cheap. And if they can get people to accept cheap, it's basically like there is an entire, both in visual art and in writing, this is not just fiction writing, and in fact I think fiction writing is probably going to be more proof against it than, say, people who write articles. Anyone making a living off writing news articles has got a real problem, because those things are little bite-sized things that AI stuff can churn out, and they're going to be terrible, and they're going to be increasingly inaccurate. But the people who put them out and the people who have fired all their writing staff are banking on the idea that the readers won't care. And that's kind of the terrifying thing. It's just like, if you can get people to a point where they will basically just accept unlimited amounts of pablum rather than real food, then, the pablum factory is going to be doing big business. So yeah, it is a real problem, not necessarily for any of the reasons that we thought AI would be a problem. But it's just, it's a problem because it's going to put an awful lot of people out of work. And obviously we're currently seeing it's a major strand of the writers and actors strikes currently going on. And, good luck to them, to be honest, because they are absolutely right to strike and protest, because it's the destruction of a way of life, of entire ways of life, entire sets of skills, and replacing it with a thing that doesn't really replace it.
I've had lots to say on this subject over the time, and you've succinctly summed a lot of it up better than I did over a long period of time. But I do think, because books, etc., are within the realms of entertainment, regardless of what happens with big business and their desire to create bigger profits essentially for themselves by doing that, at a certain point it will be unsuccessful if it's not good. because it's already a very crowded space with the amount of humans that are going for book sales and movie sales and anything else in a creative space, that it's only the things that have a unique voice or that have that level of creativity to it that seem to really gather hold. There are aspects of literature, etc., that are written very much by formula, which I think we were
and
speaking
those are
about.
obviously going to be the most fertile grounds for these kind of language learning model created text. So yeah, I mean, I think notoriously Mills and Boon romance novels are written to a very precise formula. To do, at this page she gets the guy, at this page she has to lose the guy, and the other guy comes, and that sort of thing. And obviously, the more of that there exists, the more you can sort of plug it into your text production model and get it to produce infinite clones of a degenerating quality, basically. And and we've already seen, and I mean, what you'd always like to think, but the sort of thing I do isn't going to be susceptible. But I don't think that's necessarily the case, because it's one of those, how much do there's always going to be a certain proportion of readers who don't necessarily want timeless art for the ages. And their money is as good as everyone else's money. And if you can cater to them and spend, cents on the dollar, then that means that you will actually shift your business model to cater to the people who don't care.
Yeah.
And that the problem is really, it's where the money goes at that point, because at the end of the day, writers need to eat.
They certainly do.
Yeah. And I wonder how far off are we from AI being able to craft a story without most people noticing that it's AI? Because I think now we can tell by reading it. I think most people can tell that something's not quite right. But how far off do you think we are from AI being able to churn out a novel that most people won't notice the difference?
I don't know, and I mean, as we were just saying, I think it very much varies on the sort of story. The more, because there are a lot of genres, in speculative genres and non, which rely on a certain formula, and where people basically, they would like to know they're getting a particular type of story. And the more towards that end of things you go, I think the more easy it will be for an artificially generated story to pass muster. I mean, it's like there's a lot of very, very ropey human-written Conan out there, for example. Post Howard Conan, a lot of it is really very, very iffy. You could probably get a Conan bot writing Conan short stories, which are, let's face it, frequently quite genuinely quite short. So 5,000 to 8,000 words, say. And you just keep swapping in what the thing is, and the name of the magician, and what place he's in at any given time, and 2 or 3 cultural details. And because it's a short story, you'll get away with it. If you're writing something novel length, it's more difficult, because it's that consistency of world. And I don't think that's I think in particular one of the things that this sort of artificial generator is not very good at doing, is keeping track of those details over time. And how long it'll be before that becomes possible to do it over the course of, say, 120,000 words of fantasy novel, I don't know. So that you would get this thing where, it's very difficult to make sense of where they're going, because there's no coherent idea of map or plot, and different characters keep turning up and going away without any particular structure or satisfaction. I mean, essentially, frequently the things that are often quite difficult to wrangle when you're a human writer are going to be the things that are difficult to program an algorithm to create. So I don't know. the real I mean, it's one of those. I think there are some very obvious weak spots in the publishing, in the way that publishing works, where this sort of thing is going to creep in. I mean, one of the things that writers are constantly bitching about is celebrity books. Ex-celebrity politician, comedian has decided they're going to write a children's book, or they're going to write a spy novel or whatever, and it's picked up and sold purely on the basis of, oh, people want to read this book because of this celebrity has written it, and not because of the quality of the book. And you can kind of see the next step for a celebrity who decides they want to be an author is, so, well, I want to be an author, but I don't really want to have to sit down and write a book.
Right.
Or even particularly have a conversation with a ghostwriter, when I can just basically tell this machine, do me a book with this, and it will do. And I don't know what sort of quality control goes on with celebrity books, but I suspect that the fact of their celebrity gets them through a number of hoops that a regular writer maybe wouldn't with the standard of manuscript. So that's where I see it coming in there. I see it coming in. I mean, also, God help people who have made a very good go of it on the extremely healthy self-publishing field, because the self-publishing field, where there's no gatekeeper, is currently drowning in AI-generated absolute nonsense. I mean, the most terrifying one I heard recently was AI-generated fungus-picking books. Books to tell you which fungi, mushrooms, will kill you, but generated entirely by AI.
That sounds dangerous. That sounds so dangerous.
That sounds absolutely awful. That sounds like there are going to be lawsuits. But apparently this is, of all things, this is something that now exists, that people have decided is a good idea to put out. And I can't even believe it's not as if there was some enormously lucrative fungus-picking book market, surely. So why this is even a thing, I don't know. I can't believe that people are sitting there thinking, oh, when I retire, I'm going to write that fungus-picking book that I always wanted to. I mean, what on earth is going on?
Oh, you went robot on us, Robyn.
Oh dear. Ironically enough, I am reading a book about fungi at the moment, but yeah. But I've seen the film Into the Wild. I know how that film ends in terms of picking the wrong berry. So, seems problematic.
And somewhat related, but I wonder what your thoughts are on social media and how you use social media as an author. Do you spend a lot of time on it, or is it something that you try to have your own website, or where do you kind of focus your time when you have so many other things to worry about?
Well, I mean, as of relatively recently, I do have a fit-for-purpose website at adriantchaivkovsky.com, which at least has like all the books and links to get hold of them, and just news about events and new releases and things like that. So that is a thing. Other than that, I mean, social media is currently in the same sort of shape as the planet Krypton was about 15 minutes into the Superman film. So I am kind of trying to establish a presence on as many of those small outward moving fragments as possible. But yes, I mean, look, I certainly spend more time on social media than I should, and a lot of that is because professionally you kind of have to. But yes, I mean, what is going to happen with social media, given that it has just been shot through between the eyes by its current magnate? I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild. It's hard to invest time and energy into a platform that may disappear tomorrow or may change, and everyone goes to the next big platform. So
this is the thing. I mean, there are a lot of contenders to be the next big platform, and it's a bit like those points in the history of the Roman Empire where Caesar is on his deathbed, and there are like 9 different generals, and they've all got an army, and none of them has any kind of widespread support from the populace, and that never goes well for the empire.
Yeah,
I like that
never
too.
does. Yeah. So the time always flies, but we have one more question for you before we wrap up. Something I try to ask all my guests, but curious, what was your first job?
Oh, good Lord. My first actual genuine job was in an employment agency catering solely to the building trade, about which I knew nothing. I was straight out of university, very, very middle-class white-collar, so I had literally no kind of connection with any of the people I was dealing with. I was really bad at that job, and I was there for just a week short of the period of time where I'd have started to accrue any kind of employment rights, at which point they fired me, and honestly, they were right to.
That's one of the best answers you've had, Steve.
Yeah,
I mean, if you want, the job I had after that was at a government body dealing with the processing of claims from farmers for the BSE epidemic. And I lasted 2 weeks of that because these claims from farmers came in from the abattoir covered in infected blood.
Oh.
Yeah. So there we go.
Coming to a future Adrian Tchaivkovsky novel near you. The story.
It's not a horror book. I'm not sure what is. But, yeah. So we know you're very busy, so thank you very much for taking some time out of your day with us. We really appreciate it. If someone's looking for you or your work, where's the best place to find you?
So, I mean, AdrianTchaivkovsky.com is something I have control over and therefore hopefully isn't going anywhere. Other than that, I'm at Apt Shadow on most social media platforms that I've got to.
Yes, and I can confirm that I did contact you through your website, so yeah, that is the thing. So everyone go visit and find that. So in the meantime, Robyn, if I'm not sure if your robot voice is on, but if you can let us know where to find you.
Sure. Is it all good?
Good.
Awesome
Yeah.
stuff, I love it. Yep, at Bookends and Biscuits on YouTube, Bookends and Biscuits on X or Twitter, whatever it's called, and same on Instagram, so any of those are good for me.
Awesome. And Chris.
You can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Chris Mohan, Mohan, or I'm not even mentioning it because I never post. I just react. I like people's posts, and that's about it. But you'll find me on the page during forums as well.
Awesome. Great. So thanks again, everyone, for hanging out, and hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.
Excellent. Thank you.